Welcome back. We are speaking to the Chief Executive of the South African Poultry Association, Kevin Lovell, who's joining us in studio. Kevin, let's just go back to the first question where we're chatting about the planned concessions from this side of South Africa. Tell us about that. Can you just give us a brief overview?
Okay, just briefly go back to where we were, is that the US poultry industry raised this in the US Congress January last year. We actually started getting involved at the end of January, early February. We realized that they're going to link these two items. They're not linked. As it so happens, Agoa has been running for as long as the poultry dispute has been running, but they're unrelated things. And Agoa is a gift, and you're allowed to give gifts with strings. So the Americans are perfectly entitled to do what they're doing, even if it's not a terribly good way of making friends and influencing people. And that's why we've been through this process. There's no benefit to the South African poultry industry, but there's a benefit to South Africa for Agoa, and that's the balance we've been trying to strike all along.
Now, how confident are you that these concessions, if you are confident about these concessions, that Americans will be appeased?
I'm confident the concessions we're making are fair, reasonable and rational. That I'm 100% confident of. Am I confident that the Americans think similarly? I think they still think they can abuse us to the point of severe punishment, and we don't think they can. And we've got to find a way where both parties very soon can actually agree. In the bill that was published last Friday, there's a 30-day extension for South Africa. Well, not an extension, but after 30 days it will be reviewed for South Africa. So there's a little bit more time as the can's been kicked down the road to resolve this, but there isn't much time.
Now, Kevin, September's around the corner and the US must be working around the clock to ensure that its extension passes without delays. Now, is SAPA moving at the right speed?
Oh yes, I think it's, in fact, my chairman has made it quite clear this has to be my main priority, and there's a long list, terribly long list of all things that I'm going to have to do when this is all done and resolved. The South African government is also working very strongly on this. I've been accompanied them to Washington. I've done and had a number of interactions with government, and it's not only the Minister of Trade and Industry, but the Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries is also get involved in this. There's a lot of government support, the fact that we need to try and find a resolution that's satisfactory for both us, South Africa and the Americans.
Now, SAPA says that Americans with their cheaper chicken parts are trying to overrun the domestic South African poultry sector. Now, has this position changed in any way?
Well, that's sort of a bit like a military onslaught statement, but it's not quite the way we would have thought of it. But the point is they will easily take market share because they're dumping. They're selling it below the cost of production. How much of that market share? We're talking about a fixed quota. The quota they want at this stage would take about 17,000 jobs out of South Africa, according to independent economists. The quota we prefer to offer would take about 3,000 jobs out of South Africa. That's not just chicken jobs, it's a mixture of, because it's cheaper chicken, there would be some benefits, but the overall cost to South Africa is negative. So South Africa obviously can't lose any jobs, but the Americans are saying, please choose how many you'd like to lose if you want Agoa to be renewed.
Now, speak to us about the benefits for the consumer.
The benefits to the consumer are fleeting, because you can only have cheap things when you've got money to buy cheap things, and if you don't have a job, then you no longer have cheap things. And because it's dumped, it will come in cheaper, but that cheapness doesn't last. And in any event, if the volumes of imported poultry, not just from the USA, came in, enough of it came in, it would no longer be cheap because they would have a form of market dominance. So cheap doesn't last. Cheap's actually not very good because cheap doesn't give you a job.
Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure.
That was Kevin Lovell, the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Poultry Association, joining us live in studio.